Welcome to our panel session. Before we begin, I have a few announcements. Please silence your cell phones. Do not turn them off because we encourage live tweeting the session using the hashtag IST Startup on the board. Throughout the session, we will be taking questions. You can ask questions in a variety of ways. You can either raise your hand and you'll be called on, or you can tweet them with the hashtag IST Startup, or you can text them to 37607. Text your question and IST Startup to that number. If you need stickers for your passport, they will be available after the session at the back of the room. And now I would like to hand it off to Scott Shirley, Chuck Russell, John Galanti, and Keith Deaven.
Thank you. As Maria stated, my name is Scott Shirley, and I graduated from Penn State in 2004 with a Master's of Engineering. I'm currently the Executive Director of Uplifting Athletes, and we'll talk more about that later, as well as the CEO of a tech startup called Pledge Platform. And I don't know how to work PowerPoint. I was invited to speak with you today about social responsibility and entrepreneurship. I thought it might be fun to do a live case study between the two companies that I'm involved with. So I invited the gentlemen to my right, who are all principal subjects in my story. I will make more sense at the end, but I'll do a quick round of introductions before we get started. Keith Deaven is the president of the board of Uplifting Athletes. He's also the co-founder and CEO of Media Barn, Inc. John Galanti is the lead investor in Pledge Platform and founder and CEO of DataNet Communication. Chuck Russell is a technical advisor to both companies and a co-founder and senior partner of Collective Intelligence. I'd like to ask each of them to take 2 minutes to give a little bit more on their background in the context of today's presentation.
Thanks, Scott. I'm not sure if anybody came out yesterday. We did a presentation with Media Barn, my other life. I founded Media Barn 10 years ago as a usability practice. We actually run 3 different lines of business there. We run a creative agency, which is a very standard agency model that you'd be used to seeing. Our clients there come to us for outsourced work, end-to-end design, production, very typical creative agency work. We also run a staffing agency that we actually place folks in jobs in the internet space. So project managers, technologists, designers, things like that. And then we also run a usability lab. And yesterday we actually spoke about the basics of user research, if you were able to catch that. Prior to starting Media Barn, I spent 10 years at AOL, helping AOL grow from 1 million to 32 million members from 1994 to 2004. So I was able to cut my teeth at a large corporation and take what I learned there and spin that out into a small venture in Media Barn. The last part about Media Barn I'll talk about, and then we'll hand it over to John. We have just this year launched a products division, and we're actually going to be taking a corporate social responsibility platform to market later this year, which is actually relevant to what we're talking about here. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Thanks, Keith. Again, my name is John Galanti. I am a double E from Penn State from a long, long time ago. My entire career has been focused on technology, mostly communications, telecommunications, early stage versions of that. I was one of the early players in what is now known as the wireless business, having built some of the first markets in America for a little company that's now called Verizon Wireless. I am a serial entrepreneur. I have built several companies and successfully exited those companies, thankfully. The last of which Scott mentioned, DataNet Communications, a broadband fiber optic company that brought broadband to small communities at a time when, and it's hard to think about this now, but it wasn't so long ago that internet was difficult, if not impossible, to obtain in smaller communities. So we found a niche in the marketplace, and we built custom fiber optic networks which delivered WANs and broadband internet to communities throughout the Northeast. When I exited that company, I made a conscious decision not to ever do that again, and am now semi-retired. But I've taken some of the gains from that sale, and I now invest as an angel in early stage companies, and I have about 8 of those companies now that I'm actively involved in, including the one that Scott will speak to in a few minutes called Pledge Platform. In addition, I've taken some of those other gains and formed a foundation. So I still view my foundation as an investment vehicle, but I'm investing for a purpose through the foundation, and I'm investing for profit through the angel investment components that I have in place. Chuck?
Great, thanks. I'm Chuck Russell. I'm a senior partner for Collective Intelligence Incorporated. We started the company about 15 years ago, primarily as an IT consultancy. You know, back in those days, it was the crazy days of the internet. We were a build shop for a lot of startups in and around Pennsylvania, particularly Philly and Pittsburgh. We morphed into something beyond that. You know, we start now focusing on analytics, deep analytics, predictive analytics in the healthcare markets and the financial services markets. We also build, you know, rather compelling collaborative portals. I'm sure you guys have been involved in some of that throughout your college career. We do a lot of work with startup companies as well, still today. I spend a lot of my time running the Founders Network in Central PA. That's a group of people who've either founded or are founders at a current company. We help provide support network for those. I just recently was named president of the Technology Council of Central Pennsylvania, and I'm working with a lot of companies inside Central PA to sort of nurture the technology ecosystem, to connect startups and ramp-ups and speed-ups with the larger companies like the Hershey's and the IBMs and the other big players in Pennsylvania. Over the years, I've been a founder, a software developer, a data geek, an angel investor, an advisor, and that's how I met Scott. And I think that's why I'm here today. I've been working with Scott not only on Uplifting Athletes, but also on the Pledge platform, and look forward to talking to you folks a little bit about our experiences, and really interested in hearing some of the questions you might have about this topic.
All right, thanks guys. So I think it's pretty obvious through their brief introductions how social responsibility has matriculated throughout their careers, both directly and indirectly. And John mentioned the idea of purpose and profit. That's a subject that I'm very passionate about. And as my career took a detour down the nonprofit path, I kind of reshaped my personal objective to building a life at the intersection of purpose and profit. And I'd like to take a few minutes and share my story and continue the introductions. On the screen right now is a photo of my father from fall of 2002. I was a member of the Penn State football team. I was a wide receiver. And on my way home from practice one day, I got a phone call from my mom. It was one of those calls that you know something's not right. You just get that feeling in your gut. And I answered the phone, and sure enough, she said that my father had been diagnosed with kidney cancer and was only given 6 months to live. I distinctly remember I was sitting at the corner here of a park in Atherton. I pulled into the Nittany Lion Inn parking lot. Well, she composed herself, and I tried to convince her that everything was going to be fine. People beat cancer all the time, and my dad was a high school baseball coach for 34 years, lived a very healthy lifestyle. He was the profile of the guy that beats cancer. And it didn't really make sense to me why he had only been given 6 months to live. But I figured if we went and got a second opinion, you know, we'd have a new course of action. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So we went for a third opinion, a fourth opinion. We went to all the best. We went to Sloan Kettering, we went to Fox Chase. You know, everybody that we could think of told us the same thing, that there was literally nothing that we could do. Finally, in the spring of 2003, it was actually this time of year, right before the Blue-White game, we went down to Johns Hopkins, and we got an appointment with the top oncologist at the top medical institution in the Mid-Atlantic region, and I felt like it was almost a Wizard of Oz. You know, it was just a matter of getting there, and the answer was going to be pretty simple. We got there, and the doctor stuck his head in the waiting room and said, "There's literally nothing we can do. Go home and enjoy the time that you have." He didn't even close the door of the waiting room. So we got back in the car and we drove back home, and I continued on to State College. And I decided to call the American Cancer Society to try to understand why there was nothing that we could do. And the American Cancer Society explained to me that because different cancers have different molecular pathologies, different treatment protocols, they're really different diseases. And there's not a single cure for cancer. Since kidney cancer doesn't typically respond to the standard first-line treatments like chemotherapy or radiation, it wasn't a priority for the American Cancer Society. So my next call was the Kidney Cancer Association. They said, that's all true. But the bigger problem is that because you only have a 10% chance of a 5-year survival, the mortality rate's so high that the market is so small that there's no financial incentive to make and market new treatments. And it's classified as a rare disease. So I walked into my apartment that night out here at Copper Beach. I love telling my story on campus because all these places are real to you guys too. And there sat Damone Jones. He was an offensive tackle from Philadelphia, sitting on the couch playing video games. We were literally your age. And Damone asked me how my day went. I said, you know what? It sucks. 45,000 Americans a year are diagnosed with this disease and are told that nothing can be done because nobody cares. Damone paused the game, looked at me, and shrugged his shoulders and said, well, then why don't we do something? We're Penn State football players. If we do something stupid, it's on the front page of the paper. So let's take advantage of the spotlight that we have and shine it on these people that really need a voice. So we talked about it in the locker room. The team rallied around an idea. We had to hold a summer lifting competition that became known as the Lift for Life. And some of you by now may have heard of it. It occurs in the middle of the summer during Arts Fest weekend. And essentially the team holds a lifting competition and they solicit funds from friends and family, typical grassroots fundraising, and they open it up to the public. But what happened next was really cool because we literally had guys lining up our locker offering to help, wanting to get involved. You know, they believed in our purpose. And the team had done a lot of community service up until that point, but this was different because we had ownership of it. This was different because we weren't being told what to do. We identified the problem and we were coming up with a solution. So we sat around a table to plan this first event in 3 short months, and it started to feel like we were running our own small business. You know, Damone was a marketing major, so he ran promotions. Dave Costa was a supply chain major, so he ran operations. And all the guys on the team that volunteered were using what they were learning in the classroom to solve this real world problem. 3 short months later, we held the first event in front of hundreds of fans, lots of media coverage, and we felt like we were able to successfully give a voice to the kidney cancer patients, my dad included. We did it again the following year, raised $38,000. So now in 15 short months, we'd raised over $50,000. And Dave Costa and I were writing thank you notes and decided to take a road trip out to the Kidney Cancer Association to meet the people we've been sending the money to. Well, long story short, we called out there. This was a Thursday night about 9 o'clock and told them that we wanted to come visit. They said, you're our biggest donor. Believe it or not, the $50,000 that we had raised here as Penn State students was the largest donation that the Kidney Cancer Association had received. So she said, you guys are always welcome. Problem is, this weekend's our biggest patient conference of the year. So we'd hate for you to make the trip and not get to spend any time with you. Well, Dave and I looked at each other and figured it was really the only opportunity we had, so we might as well take a chance. We went out to the airport to try to book a flight at 10 o'clock at night to Chicago, which obviously for the adults in the room, it doesn't work that way. So we ended up renting a car, going home and doing our laundry and leaving about 2 a.m. We drove to Chicago overnight. About an hour outside of the city, we got a call from the Kidney Cancer Association to see if we were still planning to come. And we told them where we were. They said, great, our keynote speaker just canceled. Do you think you could fill in? Again, of course, being college students, we said, no problem. Pulled over to a rest stop, changed our clothes, pulled up to the Hilton O'Hare. They valeted our car and ushered us right up on the stage. So we still hadn't met anybody yet. And we were standing in front of a room full of people that lived in the same world that my family lived in, where we were told that nothing can be done because nobody cares. And in walked 2 college football players who drove halfway across the country overnight and said, you know what? We care. And this is what we're doing about it. And we were interrupted 3 times by a standing ovation in a 10-minute presentation because we were taking action. And that was the aha moment for me. And I felt like if we accomplished nothing else, with our profile as student athletes, we had the privilege of inspiring people with hope by taking action. So Dave and I were treated like rock stars the rest of the weekend. We moved their medical advisory board to tears. And we drove back to State College, really inspired ourselves, and a sense of obligation to try to take this a little bit further. Well, I graduated in December with my Master's of Engineering and moved to Washington, D.C. to take a job as an engineer. I worked that job for 2.5 years, and that's actually how I was able to meet Keith down in the D.C. area. But this idea that what we were doing at Penn State could be replicated across every college football team in America, because college football doesn't have a cause. And there's 7,000 rare diseases without a champion. So if we could find a way to marry the two, we could really make a big impact on this rare disease community. So we developed a business plan for uplifting athletes. So what started as Lift for Life, through this plan evolved into Uplifting Athletes. And our mission was simple. It was to really align college football with rare diseases and raise them as a national priority through advocacy, education, outreach, and research. Our vision was to create a climate that empowers people to take action against rare diseases and inspires the medical community to find cures. With 7,000 different rare diseases and $2 billion to bring a drug to market, we figured we were never going to raise $14 trillion to cure each disease individually. We thought if we could use the platform of college football to make rare diseases matter, we could get other people to join us in the fight. And even if the money doesn't flow through us, we can still create a climate, as our vision statement communicates, that really does inspire others to take action and makes us relevant in the medical community. So I struggled with the decision to leave my engineering job. I was making about $90,000 at the time back in 2007. That was pretty good money, to start this nonprofit that literally was starting from scratch. And I talked with my HR manager at Clark, and she told me that it was really a no-risk decision. She said that the economy's good, your job will be here if it doesn't work out, but you're going to learn so much taking this entrepreneurial leap. You're going to meet so many people that win, lose, or draw, you're going to come out ahead. And Clark's a $4 billion company, so we're going to be okay without you. Uplifting Athletes sounds like they need you. So I called her the next morning. It was Monday morning. I called her and said, "You know what, Maggie? I'm going to do it. I want to give my 2-week notice and head home and give us a shot." She said, "Oh, good. I'm glad you said that, because I already told our CEO that you were leaving." And he agreed to give you $10,000 to help you get started, waive your last 2 weeks so you can hit the ground running, and we'll even let you take your computer with you. And you can see my computer actually has the Clark tags on it. So even 6 years later, they continue to take care of me as part of their corporate social responsibility. But the quote I have at the bottom of the screen is what really crystallized the decision for me. And I had studied my entire life to be an engineer. I had dreamed my entire life of being an engineer, of building landmark buildings, which I had the opportunity to do. I was living my dream. But somebody shared this quote with me from Aristotle, that where your talents meet the needs of the world, therein lies your calling. And that really crystallized everything for me. My dream wasn't just building buildings, it was building things. My talents were in building. And I had an opportunity to build a nonprofit that could impact the lives of 30 million Americans. And that really did make it a no-brainer for me. So Maggie told me that I was free to go. So I called U-Haul, packed up my apartment, and called my mom on my way home to tell her that I was moving in. So this was the first Uplifting Athletes office in the basement of my mom's house. And we did not hit the ground running. We were met with resistance everywhere we went. Every other school said, "I don't care that you did it at Penn State. Penn State's different. Penn State has good kids. Penn State has student athletes they can trust. Penn State has student athletes who are intelligent. Just because you did it there doesn't mean we can do it here." So I spent the rest of 2007 and most of 2008 trying to convince somebody else to try to join us and hold a Lift for Life event. We eventually got Colgate University, a Patriot League school in New York, to join us after 8 months of really no traction on the football side. On the medical side, we were treated like rock stars. I was speaking at international consortiums on rare diseases because everybody's been treating this as a scientific problem. Nobody had really the ability to generate public interest in it. And with the platform of college football, that's exactly the position we were in. Well, from there, the following year, Mark Herzlich, a linebacker at Boston College, was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma. Again, through the Penn State community, one of Mark's teammates played in a high school all-star game with Brett Brackett, a member of Penn State's team and the president of the Penn State chapter of Uplifting Athletes. So Ryan calls me and says, my best friend was just diagnosed with a rare disease. Can we hold a Lift for Life event at Boston College? Now, I had read about Mark's story on Yahoo News, and I had been trying every which way to get Boston College to let me talk with them, and nobody was interested. I later came to find out it's because Lance Armstrong was calling them, Jimmy V's brother was calling them, the American Cancer Society was calling them. So Scott Shirley and Uplifting Athletes didn't have the brand awareness to get into Boston College to leverage Mark's story. But because this was something the team wanted to do, Ryan was able to open the door. So I drove up to Boston. Ryan and I met with the coach. Coach said, "Yeah, I don't care. Do whatever you want." So 30 days later, we held their first Lift for Life, and they raised $30,000. Afterwards, the coach puts his arm around me and says, Scott, the only reason I told you to go ahead and do whatever you want is because Ryan's been nothing but a pain in our butt. And I figured this was the last I'd ever hear about it. So what you did with Ryan in 30 days is remarkable. I've seen you turn him into a man. Just then, Ryan walks up to us, and Ryan was from inner city, New York. And he said, well, Coach, I guess I can't go out and get in trouble tonight. Coach said, well, why is that, Ryan? He said, because this is bigger than me. I don't want to mess this up. And I have a quote here. This is Vince Lombardi's definition of leadership. He says, true leadership is the unexpected, undeserving, selfless acts of kindness that nobody can deny. And I really think that's the leadership that Uplifting Athletes has thrived on, not just at our corporate office, but on the campus. We're currently operating on 24 campuses. All the chapters are run by current football student athletes with leaders like Mark Herzlich, Brett Brackett, Ryan Lindsay. Penn State's current chapter president is Ben Klein. And what I've found through my experience with Uplifting Athletes is that individuals with a purpose are happier and companies with a purpose are more profitable. So we fast forward to last year, and there's a little boy named Jack Hoffman at Nebraska. And Jack's story is really personal to me because we give a trophy called the Rare Disease Champion Award. It goes to the leader in college football who realizes the position they're in to make a positive and lasting impact on the rare disease community. A long story short, Rex Burkhead, running back from Nebraska, went to visit Jack in the hospital, and the university nominated Rex for our award because of that relationship that Rex had developed with Jack. Without our award, nobody else knows about this relationship. Well, the voting is done online, and Rex ends up with more votes than any candidate in the Iowa caucus for the Republican national presidential election. So again, what was a story between two people was able to take the spotlight we have of college football and share that story with 76,000 Cornhuskers in the state of Nebraska to rally around Rex so he wins our trophy. After he wins a trophy, the team wants to start a chapter, so we get them started. And I have a conversation with Jack's dad, and I say to Jack's dad, you know, when we started this, I never thought we'd have an impact on my father's life, and the first new treatment came to market 1 month after he passed away. Well, Jack is still alive. You need to run as fast as you can. Well, last April, during their spring game, their chapter president had this idea to put Jack in the game to score a touchdown and run down the field to promote their 5K run that their chapter was hosting that summer. And if you haven't seen it yet, what happened next was really pretty magical. Again, this technology thing eludes me. That's fine. That's fine.
And he's wearing the number 22, guys.
It is Jack Hoffman of Team Jack coming out on the field right now. There's one down at short. For the red team, Jack Hoffman has been adopted really by this football team. A young man who has battled brain cancer is on the field right now for the Huskies.
One more snap for Taylor Martinez, too, who will hand it off to Jack.
So Taylor gets the shotgun set, gives it to Jack. Here he goes. He's got blockers out in front.
There he
There's
goes.
one on the midfield. Listen to this crowd. As Jack Hoffman, a young man that, as I mentioned, has really been adopted by this football team, just scored a touchdown.
Oh, wow. What a moment.
And both benches empty.
That was a moment right there. Wow. Goosebumps.
So that moment, created by Uplifting Athletes, was viewed by 8 million people on YouTube that weekend. It made it onto every major news network, sports and otherwise. Good Morning America. Ended up, President Obama flew Jack and his family to the White House to talk about their mission to increase funding for pediatric brain cancer research. Through the run that summer, through a t-shirt project they did, the chapter ended up raising $250,000. So what started as a relationship between a player and a brain cancer patient turned into $250,000. We then, as Uplifting Athletes, help the family start their own foundation to continue that fight. They go on and raise $1 million. So we're now at 1.2 over the course of the last 12 months. We find out this summer that the state government requested an appropriation of $1.8 million for brain cancer research funding in the state of Nebraska. Brings us up to $3 million. And we just found out this fall the university is starting a cancer center, and they want Team Jack to serve as the Jimmy Fund is to Dana-Farber with a $400 million commitment. So something as simple as a little boy running down a field has turned into a $403 million impact through this idea of building an ecosystem that we talked about. You know, again, that doesn't run through the Uplifting Athletes books, but it's not possible without Uplifting Athletes. And that's how I think we're going to be able to work collaboratively with other inspired fans to really solve this rare disease problem. So we have a leadership retreat over the summer, and we bring all the guys from all the chapters together, and we take them through workshops and team building exercises, and we start to develop a plan for the upcoming year for their chapter. Some of the schools had an idea, kind of leveraging this idea of Jack's Run, to start raising money through the sport, through the fall, by scoring touchdowns. So the rest of that summer, I went out and I solicited quotes from friends that work in the tech space to build a platform that would allow us to collect pledges per touchdown, charge the credit cards, and create kind of an interactive, competitive fundraising platform. I meet John Galanti, solicit him for the amount that we had identified that we needed as Uplifting Athletes to hire somebody to build this platform for us. And John sits down and says, I will absolutely not give you that money. I will not donate that money for Uplifting Athletes to build this platform. He said, I'll double the money to kick off an investment to build a new company to develop this platform, because if you're just looking at it in college football and causes, you're only looking at a slice of the market. He said, if you think about the 1 million amateur sports teams that are out there, 45% of them are in 3 sports alone that are raising money for uniform, for equipment, to lower registration fees, to travel, to provide scholarships. There's an opportunity here not just to do well as investors, there's an opportunity here to do good by helping teams raise more money, increase their margins, create new opportunities, and all the other benefits are associated with the experience that youth get from playing sports. Not to mention the experience that Uplifting Athletes get through their involvement with our charity and the impact that we're having on the rare disease community. So we did just that. We established the equity structure. We went out and started raising money. We took some seed money to start the development, and we developed a product under the Pledge platform company called Pledge It. And we're running some test campaigns right now. But our first MVP, our low fidelity MVP, we actually tested with one of our chapters down at Florida State. In the national championship game, the university, with the support of the Rose Bowl and the BCS, allowed the team to use Pledge platform to solicit their fans during the game to raise money. And every touchdown was scored, more fans went on their phone and pledged more money. And every touchdown that scored not only brought in the money that was pledged for it, but it encouraged, through the social proof and the virability of it, it encouraged more people to get involved. And at the end of the game, you can see in the photo here of Coach Jimbo Fisher holding up the trophy. He's actually wearing his blue Uplifting Athletes wristband in the photo, holding up the trophy at the end of the game. And that's the impact that we've had on their team through their national championship run. And again, creating a platform that they're able to use with very little effort, really. I mean, these guys were preparing to play in the national championship game. And during the first half of the game, I was worried because they had been shut out, and I thought maybe they were spending a little too much time on this. But they figured it out at halftime and came out and scored 4 touchdowns and raised about $10,000 for Fanconi anemia research. And the turnaround on that, it was about, what, John, about 48 hours of code and about 24 hours of promotion to raise $10,000 and to test, proof of concept on one of the 5 biggest sporting events in the country.
With the school that had sworn off social media.
Right.
None of the players.
Yeah, they weren't allowed.
Active in social media.
And if you think through that timeline, they had some issues going on where they wanted the players to be very private. Well, they were working through some legal issues in the midst of all this too. So it really is a remarkable story. And I think it's really just the tip of the iceberg, and what we have, the opportunity we have in front of us is great. And we can talk about it through the panel discussion a little bit, but I really wanted to have John and Keith here because these two companies exist as two completely separate entities. And we had to establish a business relationship between them that gives Uplifting Athletes use of the software, that provides a revenue stream, and it really fits this do good, do well model. And for me personally, as the leader of both companies, it allows me to exist at the intersection of purpose and profit. So with that, I'd like to open up the panel for conversation. And I have a few questions to lead with, and I don't know if you're receiving questions online, but we can check in with you a little bit later. So in line with the theme of the presentation, what does it mean to be a socially responsible entrepreneur? I'd like to throw that to you guys as the first question. And Chuck, you look the most comfortable right now, so we can start with you.
I'm always comfortable. I think your point about purpose is the most important one, and I, through the years, have always felt that every company owes something back to the community. And it's only through the generation of profits that gives everyone the latitude, the leverage, the luxury of doing that. And we had a little discussion earlier today. It's very hard to exist purely as a corporate nonprofit charity, right? And I think I'll let John talk about that a little bit more. But clearly, the success we have, with the companies we build needs to be turned into something more purposeful than profit, right? And if you look around some of the greatest, the most successful companies in Silicon Valley, there's plenty of models for corporate foundation work, right? You guys are all probably familiar with Salesforce.com, right? Mark Benioff and the Salesforce Foundation. They've developed a wonderful formula for not only creating a foundation that donates a great portion, right, of the money they generate to local, oftentimes San Francisco-based charities, but each of their employees is given time, again, luxury, right, to turn that into community service. In fact, they're almost expected to do it. We've always heard about, Google's 10% hacker time, right? Well, this is 10% social time, right? Really important. So it's a game changer. And it's something that I think everybody should model their company after. I know we do. Working with Scott's probably one of the most, well, I'll tell you what. You want to see a panel judge cry, I couldn't help it, It's meant a lot to me, And, we're committed to this cause. So.
Thanks, Chuck.
You bet.
I guess I take a slightly different sort of old school approach to this. When I look at a company, whether it's a company I'm building and running or a company that I'm going to invest in, I look at it from the perspective of how you maximize profits. I mean, first and foremost, that's the reason to be in a for-profit business. But with that said, when I think back to my DataNet communications company, it became very, very clear to us that we as a company could do both. We could do good and do well at the same time. And based on the size of the check that folks wrote us to buy the company, I think we did well, pretty well. But in the do good area, what we found is that we could adjust our business model. We were focused on bringing broadband communications to some very, very high-end customers. Our focus was in the tri-state area around New York. And so we had a lot of the big name investment banks, the names you're all familiar with, using our networks, particularly after 9/11, to put data, put all trading data in a very, very safe location. So you can see these were big customers. These were customers that were paying us upwards of $250,000 a month just for the right to ride on the network. But what we found is that same network we were building could pass through and touch every hospital in every community that we were in and provide them services they couldn't get before. And so we ended up interconnecting to a couple hundred medical facilities, hospitals, clinics, imaging centers, and the like. At the same time, we managed to interconnect to pretty much every school system, whether it was a grade school or a university. And we brought them together on the network. We brought every library, every not-for-profit library in our footprint onto that network. And because of the base that we had with larger customers, we were able to very, very cost-effectively provide services to communities that didn't have services or didn't have the quality of services that they needed. And so those customers were very, very pleased with us. And this is, and I hate to use this word, but this is sort of the mercenary approach to doing good. When you do good, customers like you. We had a period of time that exceeded 3 years where we did not lose a single customer. And that's unheard of in this business, in a highly competitive business, to not lose a single customer. You clearly have built up a reservoir of goodwill. So when you look at it from a purely business standpoint, do good, do well, works. With that said, companies that do well financially are much better positioned to help out in the not-for-profit world. It's much easier to focus on providing the kinds of assistance that a group like Uplifting Athletes deserves when you have the monetary resources to assist them. And that's why we put a foundation together, separate and apart from our investment vehicles into startup companies. But in many ways, we treat them the same. We look at investments in not-for-profits in a very similar fashion. We look for a good management team, and I think you heard just from Scott's story how dedicated he is to making his charity work. So we look for a good management team. We clearly look for a good product, just as you do on a for-profit entity. We want to make sure that they have a vehicle to deliver on the mission, and that the mission is valid. And so the approach we take is an approach that looks much, much like a venture capitalist would look at an early stage company. And that's the way we look at not-for-profits and helping not-for-profits. Now, with respect to specifics of Pledge Platform, what happened when I met Scott, I quickly fell in love with what they were doing at Uplifting Athletes. And there was no question I was going to write them a check for their mission. But I also believed that the software platform they were looking to develop was going to take them off their focus of their core mission. We've learned this too in the startup world. You must focus on what you do best. And they had a clear mission. They were expanding on that mission, but I wanted them to stay focused on that mission. So by developing this corporate structure where we have two entities, but the two entities were clearly interlaced, we could build them a bigger platform, a better platform, and we could amortize that platform over a whole host of not-for-profits. I mean, literally thousands of not-for-profits can use this platform, because while it appears to be sports-centric, when you think about the majority of not-for-profits in this country, they are in full-time fundraising mode. You can quickly see how performance-based fundraising, which is what this is, can go well beyond a sports scenario. When you think about the number of walks and runs that Susan G. Komen, as an example, will run across this country this year. This is a perfect tool to measure performance, to use the API connections that this platform has to all of the various social media components, and really act as a multiplier, while allowing Uplifting Athletes to have a much better platform and a much better reach, and it didn't cost them a penny. They get to spend every one of the dollars they raise to focus purely like a laser on their mission. And that's why we separated the two. And it's a relationship that I think is truly copacetic.
Thanks, John.
Just to sort of expand a little bit on what John and Chuck were talking about in terms of companies having the ability to support their corporate social responsibility, you absolutely have to treat your company as a for-profit, even if you are a nonprofit. And when Scott decided to form a board, he was at a point in the lifespan of his organization where his dedication and his time were great, and everything was going pretty well, but he needed some help really treating Uplifting Athletes as a business. And it's kind of interesting to think about a nonprofit as a for-profit business from a board perspective. So when we sit down with Scott and we talk about his performance and how things are going and things like that, I look at it no differently than I look at my company when we sit down and think about how our company is performing, to make sure that the business of Uplifting Athletes is healthy and can continue its mission. So when we talk about companies being able to leverage their profits to create their corporate social responsibility programs, you have to do well before you can do good. In those terms, I mean, obviously, if your business is doing good at the same time as a nonprofit, they coexist. But for companies, they need to be able to get themselves into a financial position where they can actually expand on their corporate social responsibility, and that's where the for-profit work really comes in. To expand on the Aristotle quote, I'm not quite sure what it said, but right, no, right. I don't quote Aristotle very often. Scott and Pledge Platform is using his talents and his position in Uplifting Athletes to create a platform that is going to better his nonprofit. So he understands what his mission is in Uplifting Athletes. And in the formation of Pledge Platform, he is leveraging what he already knows to create a for-profit entity that is going to come back and help his again. So to John's point, he is focused on what he's doing for, I keep getting confused, Uplifting Athletes, but all the while building Pledge Platform to support it. And it's the confluence of what he knows how to do that lets him run both companies. So it's making sure that you're spending your time on what you know to do good is kind of the point there, I guess.
Just a thought, though, too. And I think John said something that made me think about metrics, right? So when you measure, do you measure a nonprofit differently than you would measure a for-profit? No. Right. And so the question really is from a nonprofit. Maybe I'm going to throw one back to the moderator.
Sure.
What are your metrics? I mean, so I know what mine are when I run my company, right? Right. What are you using?
Well, I mean, we run the standard, the P&L, the balance sheet, the cash flow.
Right.
We have all those financial metrics in place.
Right.
We set strategic goals, long-term and short-term, that we measure against. And we have this kind of separate category that's mission impact. So whenever we evaluate things on a quad, what's the mission impact? What's the margin? There's obviously good quadrants and there's bad quadrants, and that's how we evaluate the decisions that we make as an organization. And it actually led to a very long, very deep conversation and analysis about how do we move forward with this Pledge Platform idea. And to pivot off of something that Keith said and kind of transition to the next question, the next question I wanted to ask was, how do you choose between a for-profit and a nonprofit? But if I could start the conversation, Keith said, in the for-profit world, you have to do well to be able to do good. In the nonprofit world, you start out with the do good part, and I think a lot of people fail to figure out the do well part on the nonprofit side. And there's a great irony to me, because really, fundamentally, the only difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit is in the tax code. I can't, as a nonprofit, I have no equity to offer. As a nonprofit, I have a tax benefit to offer. That's it. That's the only difference. Every other aspect of it is running a for-profit entity. But if you look at the significance of those two things, the inability to sell equity, I think, is a far greater handicap than the ability to offer a tax incentive. And the great irony to me is, now having experience on both sides of the fence, I've received more single larger gifts for the for-profit because it's in exchange for equity. So the ability to stand up a for-profit pre-revenue exists, whereas that investment is a donation on the nonprofit side, and you have to show that you're doing good in order to earn the donation. So, do you guys have any thoughts on, if you have an idea for social enterprise, is it better to register as a 501c3, or is it better to remain a for-profit entity?
Well, I'll try it, sure. I think a couple things. One, I think from a personal standpoint, what is your mission? And if you are cause-based with your mission, then why not give the nonprofit a try? From a business standpoint, like you said, I'm not sure that there's really much of a difference. But if you're in it to create a business that is going to be making you money down the line, I mean, I think you gave some stats earlier when you left Clark. You were making considerably more than I know that you're making now.
Yeah.
And that's a cause-based motivation that you have. That's not a money-based motivation. And so that's a personal question for everybody that's going to start a business. Is what is your motivation?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. It's about, if there's a true primary profit motivation, then it's a for-profit entity, and that's the way you structure yourself. With respect to the issue, though, of how you go about raising money and addressing Scott's issue of a lack of an equity component for a not-for-profit, what has to be understood is that there's sort of a risk-reward scenario, and it's almost backwards between a for-profit and a not-for-profit. In a profit world, someone comes to me with an idea or a concept, and that's all it is. And there's no proof that their mission can ever be fulfilled. But I make an assessment of that mission, product, service. I look at the market opportunity, and I look at what the potential reward is for the risk I take if I write that large equity check. Now, when you move to a not-for-profit, because there isn't that profit motivation as an investor, and even from a foundation perspective, I still call myself an investor, I often look to see that the mission is first being accomplished at some level, that there's proof of a dedication to the mission, there's a proof of a true need for the mission, and instead of sort of taking my own research, as I would do with a startup company, a for-profit company, in the not-for-profit world, you're really less able to get someone to say, yes, I'll write you a big check in hopes that you'll figure out how to handle this mission. So in that sense, the risk scenario is much greater but much easier to absorb in a for-profit world than it is in a not-for-profit world.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if you were to write a flow chart, profit or nonprofit, yes, no, I'd start with what's the product and service the organization offers, and clearly here we have two different companies, right? We have Uplifting Athletes, which raises money and then distributes that money to worthy charities. So in reality, you're a broker, right? You create a brand, you rally people around the brand, you raise money through the network, and then you provide that money to the charities you choose. Very different than creating a product. When you create a product, the capital required to do that is radically different, especially in software, than it is when you're creating a for-service charity. The kinds of people that you need to attract require incentive plans that often include equity distribution, maybe salaries that you couldn't quite convince your board and a nonprofit to pay, and so it scales rather differently. That doesn't mean you can't create a pledge platform that is a socially responsible, right, well-connected, for-profit business. So I really think that's it. What are we creating? What wealth are we trying to create, right? How are we going to distribute that well? And that's the flow chart. You know?
Yeah, I think you guys make a lot of great points, and I think, to me, obviously, they can coexist. And I think that's really one benefit. But referring to the Aristotle quote again, I think all three of you are great examples of having a purpose, using your natural talents to the best of your ability, and there is a very direct and tangible benefit to providing broadband network to hospitals and schools. You know, you don't have to be a mercenary to see that. And you guys have all found a way to use your natural talents to the best of your ability in a way that is socially responsible and makes the world a better place. Moving on to the next question, thinking about the concept of an ecosystem that I talked about in the rare disease community, there is such a thing as an ecosystem in the startup community. So as this idea developed to start Pledge Platform, the next question is where does it exist? And I think there's some critical factors to consider there, not to discount investment and talent. So I'd like to throw that back to you guys and talk about the importance of a healthy ecosystem, and can a tech startup exist in this region?
Sure. That's how we met.
Yeah.
Right? I met Scott about 18 months ago, almost a little bit longer maybe, while we were in the process of trying to build the Central PA startup ecosystem, right? We run a thing called Startup Week. Hey, sound familiar? Our Startup Week's a little bit different. It's a number of events that end up in a startup weekend, a business hackathon. But it's a foundational element in getting founders, would-be founders, technologists who are interested in maybe starting a company, a tech company together. We hack a business over a weekend. Scott said, I want to be part of that. Let me see what we can do to help. We bring in mentors. Scott acted as a mentor and a coach for the weekend. And so, I look at startup ecosystems kind of like the Boulder model. If you want to read a good book, there's several out there, but there's this thing called the Boulder thesis. And I'll just give it to you briefly. The Boulder thesis says startup ecosystems are founder-led, period. Great ideas come from great founders who then build great companies, right? Foundational element. They're the breeders. They build things. Even failures eject great talent into an ecosystem that can be started or absorbed by other startup companies. Surrounding that, you have the feeder network, which could be anything from angel money to VC money to mentors to community development like Ben Franklin Technology Partners, which has been really big in our ecosystem, that help provide the seed capital for the startups to succeed. Beyond that, there's other feeder networks like accounting firms, the services firms, the creative firms who help that startup scale to a ramp up and speed up state. And ecosystems are fragile, right? And they don't start organically. They have to be jump started, and they take quite a long time to build, And so we're on this 36-month mission in Central PA. And you look around, would you know where to go get money, for instance, if you started your company tomorrow?
I could figure it out.
Could you?
I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea behind the ecosystem is the roadmap. I started my first company in 1993. I had no roadmap. I made a lot of mistakes, right? The ecosystem, had it been there, would have prevented a lot of mistakes. I started my second company in 1996. I had a choice, sell it or build it. You guys, we were just talking about the HBO show that's on, I guess what's it called, Silicon Valley or something like that?
Yeah.
Have you seen it? Take a look. The kid said, do I sell it or do I build it? Well, I sold it, right? I said, hell, it's good money, let's sell it. Better advice, I keep it. I sell it in Moldable. Again, mistakes, right? So an ecosystem is there to help support the entrepreneur. And, it's the idea about building the ecosystem, again, is the roadmap, right? The support system, support network. But I'll let you talk a little bit about seed capital, because I think that's a really important part of it. So even though I say that it's got to start with the founder, be founder-led, that can only get so big. There's a lot of companies that cannot grow through organic cash, right? Yeah. They can't scale fast enough. They can't hit the market fast enough. They have to go out and get big fast. And I'll turn that over to you, because that's really the next step. Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly that it is founder-led. I also believe, though, there are a lot of communities that try to sort of force the issue. I did a lot of work in economic development at a state and a federal level. And what I found is, if you go back in time, that every successful phase of development of business, whether it's biotech or nanotech. Everybody around the country says, we'll set an ecosystem to support
we want
that.
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. All you need to do is look around the country and see how everyone tries to use the word valley when they're setting up their ecosystem.
Totally hate it.
Right? They all want to be just like Silicon Valley. Well, the reality is, anytime you want to set up an ecosystem, you've got to look in the mirror and say, what are we? What are the skills we have? What are the abilities we have? What are the resources we have? And you have to be very, very pragmatic about that. And so, pivoting to money, when you start thinking about that, you've got to look and say, what resources could be made available to us? Because here's the other reality. Good ideas, I don't care where they are, money finds good ideas. In that sense, capitalism is pure. One of the companies that I'm invested in now, which is doing very, very well, came 4 guys out of Syracuse University, out of a dormitory. And are any of you from that part of the world? I think it's still snowing up there. All right? I'm sorry, but it's a miserable place to be. And there's not a lot of investment bankers. And there's not a lot of venture capitalists. I don't know that there's any. But they had a great idea. And we found that great idea. Now, we moved that great idea to Soho, but the fact of the matter is, money will find good ideas. In this day and age, with communication being what it is, it's really hard to keep a good idea down. As long as you've got a founder behind it who's willing to push the daylights out of it, and it's that spark that then helps develop the ecosystem. People will come to it. But it's not going to look like Silicon Valley. It's going to look like whatever it should look like for your particular community.
I'm just going to make the obvious point. I mean, these guys have done a great job of covering what it takes to create an ecosystem. I mean, the obvious point for me as a pure product person is these types of ecosystems, when they're functioning properly, accelerate product development. We can now, this phone that's in my pocket is so much more powerful than the Apple IIe that I first had when I was a kid. And that's all a result of these ecosystems really pushing product development. And certainly at a macroeconomic sense, these ecosystems are vital for the company or for our country to continue to grow on the world economy. But I mean, without the support of some of these ecosystems, some of these companies might not have ever succeeded. Back to Chuck's point about making mistakes, many mistakes happen, but a lot of companies actually do succeed because of the ecosystems, and we have much better products, and our lives are a lot better because of them.
Just add one point.
Sure.
What we're beginning to see more and more of, though, is that ecosystems are becoming virtual. If you look at websites like AngelList,
Absolutely.
where ideas from all over the world show up there and have an opportunity to get funded, have an opportunity to get mentored, and have an opportunity to find like-minded individuals who might want to collaborate and be part of whatever mission that company is setting about on. So the virtual nature also, though, needs to be supported. And a community that's realistic about what they have and what they don't have can leverage what they don't have by utilizing these virtual opportunities.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. And thanks, John, for the mobile phone that Keith
Thanks.
pulled out of his pocket. With that, I'd like to open up the floor for questions for our panelists. We have about 15 minutes left. We can start with a show of hands, or we can go to Twitter. Yes.
You mentioned a lot about the differences in nonprofits versus for-profits in terms of what you want to qualify as you're going out. I guess in terms of vision, what do you see biggest differences in, the missions of for-profits versus non-for-profit?
So the question is, what's the biggest difference between the missions of a not-for-profit and a for-profit?
Who do you serve? I think John brought that up, but I'm going to let you do it because I just stole your thunder, but I think you said it really well at lunch. No.
Go ahead, because I forgot.
No, I think I told you. We weren't drinking either. In a for-profit, right, you serve your investors, you serve your employees. right? In a nonprofit, you're serving the people, you're donating money to the community, right? And Scott will tell you, sure, his customers are, you know, the athletic programs that raise the money, his end customer, right? Or the various programs he's helping fund, right? Very different way of viewing the world. You know, as a donor, I might feel bound to the brand. I may feel like a shareholder, but I'm not. I don't own equity. I may be more forgiving because I don't own equity if Scott makes a mistake. But as a shareholder in a for-profit, I may feel cheated, right? The motivations are totally different, and you're serving different masters, really, right? Yeah.
Now I remember.
See,
Thanks.
I told you.
Yeah, in the absolute sense, when you look at a for-profit entity, it serves three masters. It serves its investors, its shareholders. It serves its employees, and it serves its customer. And the reality is, if you decide, for whatever reason, within that for-profit entity, to say, look, we're going to do something socially responsible that is off our mission, and it may be a good thing to do, you are going to have to harm one of the three of them in some fashion. Because this thing over here you want to do costs money, or time, or both. And the only way you can get the funding or the time is to, in some fashion, take it away from one of the three of them.
Absolutely right. So the point I tried to make earlier about the Salesforce.com Foundation, if 10% of an individual's time is dedicated to community service, that's 10% theoretically less productivity in building the product or serving the customer or returning value to the shareholder. So it really is a zero-sum game. It may be an investment a wildly successful company can make, but it's a very different view of the world, right? Very different view.
But when you look at a not-for-profit, obviously they don't have that shareholder. Their primary focus is the customer. And in many, many cases, the trade-off is actually being made by the employee. I don't want to talk numbers, but I will tell you, Scott took one hell of a cut in pay to run his not-for-profit from where he was before. So it's clear that he has decided the mission trumps his personal need for that additional salary. So I think while sometimes it's hard to put the words around how you make those decisions, if you look at those groups and how they are impacted, I think the answer flows pretty naturally.
I mean, and the key word everybody keeps talking about here is the mission, right? So you have to decide first, what is your mission? You know, when you start your company, what are you setting out to do? And it all flows from that.
And it's okay for that mission to have a purpose and still be a for-profit.
Absolutely.
I can tell you, I know a number of companies that have filed as nonprofits that behave like a for-profit company, but they're not filed like you. They're not a charity. Okay? They're responsible to a vastly different set of tax codes, right, than a for-profit. But I sometimes compete with them in delivering services to some of our government clients. I'm not sure the playing field's always level in that case, but don't confuse. Not all nonprofits are the same, I guess is my point. Right?
Yeah, to Chuck's point,
one
Uplifting
last-
Athletes is a
one last
501c3.
Yeah, right.
On not-for-profits, don't confuse the phrase not-for-profit with meaning for loss. All right? You know,
Very good point.
and a lot of not-for-profits get confused, and they think that that's okay. We're just going to run losses all over the place.
Yeah.
No, you cannot be effective in your mission if you're constantly running deficits.
There's a mantra in nonprofits that says more money, more mission.
But in balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Great points. Do we have any other questions from the floor? We have one in the back.
Platform. It's a neat idea, a neat concept of development, but talking a little bit about kind of betting on the outcome of sports, that kind of seems to me like the NCAA might get kind of front of that activity a little bit, or no?
So the question is, with the Pledge Platform product, if there's any risk in the gambling arena, and I can let you guys talk to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
We spend hours on that topic. Because at one level, as we all know, gambling is the national pastime of America. And so at one level you said, well, if this was more like a gambling kind of thing, we had actually raised more money. But as we peeled back the layers, what you quickly find out, and we looked at every which way you might be able to game this thing to turn it into what looks like a gambling platform. And as you think through all the permutations and combinations, what you quickly figure out is all the money is going to a good cause. None of the money is going to that individual who, to use your words, is putting down the bet. And it's that clear disconnect that made us feel comfortable. And we've run this by a number of entities at very high levels through the sports world, and they loved the idea. And we've been at, and Scott, I'll let you talk about where the various coaching groups that we met with, and the administration folks that show up at those coaching conferences. But they just love the idea of being so much more efficient. When you think about fundraising today for most of these sports entities at low levels, from 5-year-olds on up, for the most part, what they're really doing is extorting the friends and family to give them money in exchange for products they don't want. Yeah, or wrapping paper or cookie dough. And what we found, we did an analysis of all the 990s, which are the not-for-profit filings, and all of these sports entities, whether it's Little League or Pop Warner football, they all file with the government. And for the most part, most of them are collecting $1 and getting to keep 30 cents. It's just a tremendously inefficient way to raise money from people who are going to give you the money anyway. I mean, if grandmom was going to give you $20, she actually wants the $20 to go towards your soccer uniform, not a third of it to go to some party in the middle, a third of it to go to a product that she has no desire to keep, and then you get a third for your uniform.
Right.
So we're taking a whole lot of the friction out of the process and just making it more efficient for the end player.
I think of it more of gamification than gamblification, if you will, really. You're really turning it into something that folks can contribute to on a per touchdown, per hit, per goal basis. And I think that makes the game a little bit more interesting. I think it engages the donor, and it provides, I think, a whole level of really interesting metrics that can be delivered, right? I mean, think about that. Who scored the goal that brought in the $10 per goal, right? Those kinds of things make it interesting. But I think it'd be very difficult to gamble with it unless you built that specifically into the platform. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. And I think fundamentally, it's just the matter of fact is that you're not getting a return on the money that you're pledging. So I think for it to be considered gambling, if it were to be a bet, there had to be a chance that money was going to come back to you with some multiple.
Sure, absolutely right.
I saw another hand somewhere here in the middle. We're down to our final 4 minutes. We have a...
My questions keep changing as you're answering. It becomes more clear. But I guess what I'm wondering is, how do you make that decision between if you have an idea and you think that you could serve the mission better by not being a nonprofit, by being a for-profit company, to get the initial investment for the technology and the resources you need, shouldn't you go that way and then you can file later? I know people that have filed and it took years to get a response from the government, and by then they weren't even around. So, where do you go from
I think it's the foundation thing,
Yeah, take the John Galanti route, right?
So to paraphrase the question, we're back to kind of the idea of that flow chart, that decision of should it be a for-profit, should it be a not-for-profit. For me, I think it's really answering the question, what's going to be the easier way for you to raise money for the idea or the product you have? Is it going to be easier to solicit donations because of the good nature, or is it going to be easier to raise money because of the return that you could provide to investors? So I think that would be the initial decision point for me when faced with that. To your point about the government taking a long time to respond to a request, and Chuck touched on it earlier, there's different types of nonprofits. Uplifting Athletes exists as a 501c3, and what Chuck was talking about, an example would be in the banking industry, where you have credit unions who are obligated to a different set of regulations than the banks are. That's a whole different type of nonprofit. Religious organizations are a different type of nonprofit. But with regards to the government responding to the termination letter for the 1099, or I'm sorry, but they, when you file, your EIN number never changes. So that filing, once the decision is made, is retroactive back to the beginning of the company within 27 months.
The difficulty you're going to face, though, if you start as a for-profit entity, you're essentially coming to us as investors and saying, please give me $1 million, and I'm going to give you one hell of a return on that money. And then 2 years from now, you're going to say what? Never mind?
No, that's what I was trying to figure out, how you make the decision beforehand.
Yeah. Well, that's the point I'm driving to. You have to make the decision on the front end. You can't, in good conscience, go to an investor and say, I'm a for-profit entity, and here's the kind of return we hope to provide you if we're successful.
Right.
And then turn around 2 years or 2 months or 2 days later and say, never mind.
I'd still go back to what kind of product you're building, and what's the life cycle and time to market for the product. How much capital do you need raised to bring it to market? Can you do it organically? Can you create organic cash flows, right, short term? And if not, you're going to have to go raise cash. And if you have to go raise cash, you're going to raise it one way, right?
The other irony to me, and somebody mentioned it earlier, is nonprofit doesn't mean loss. And the irony is that as a nonprofit, I want to finish the year with the biggest surplus or retained earnings that I can to continue to carry the organization forward.
Absolutely.
On the for-profit side, you're trying to spin off your earnings and report on December 31st as little net income as possible on the balance sheet. So the irony there is that the not-for-profit wants to retain earnings and the for-profit wants to spin them off.
Is that whole tax man thing?
It really is. And those are the differences between C Corp, S Corp, LLP, LLC.
That's right.
How much you keep, how much you can reinvest, where the profits go, how they're retained.
I'm sorry?
Download this one more.
See an accountant, don't listen to us.
Yeah, I think our time is up, so if we could take one more question. I think we have a question up front.
Yep.
Yeah, when you're evaluating a business idea, do you place more weight on the idea itself or the founders?
The question is, when you're evaluating an idea as an investor or as a donor, do you place more weight on the idea or on the founder?
Founder. Plain and simple. There are a lot of ideas which are okay ideas, implemented by really good people, that can make a hell of a lot of money.
Right.
There are a lot of very good ideas that are run into the ground by mediocre people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I tend to think, though, I'm going to look at them initially equal and evaluate the idea and evaluate the founding team. I might look at a great idea and a bad founding team and not fund it. Right? Give me both, or a mediocre idea and a good founding team, might be fundable. There's always the pivot. There's always the ability for the idea to morph or meet the market or find some good product market fit somewhere downstream. A good founding team will find that, right? You've seen some really great pivots. What's the best pivot we've seen in the past decade, right? Got it? It's that camera app? Yeah, no kidding. What did they start at? Their idea was mediocre, and they sold for $2 billion? $1 billion? Crap load of money. Wasn't their original idea, right?
And Keith, on the agency side, now with the product division, you have a chance to evaluate that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have an easy answer. I do it the founder because the only companies that I'm invested in are run by us. So yeah, founder for sure.
That's cheating.
And to answer your question and to wrap this up with Uplifting Athletes and Pledge Platform as the example, the idea of Pledge Platform really isn't rocket science. I mean, we're sitting in a room full of tech. You guys are probably sitting there thinking how you could build that product. But not just me as the founder, but Uplifting Athletes as the marketing partner, there's access to markets there. There's so many other dimensions to this that are brought to the table because of who we are and what we do, not because the idea is rocket science.
No, you're actually right.
And with that, I think we are over our time. We'll respond to Twitter questions on Twitter. And thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thanks.
Enjoy the rest of the week.